Buttons and buttonholes is one way to bring closure to a garment. To do the buttonholes, the first that you will look at in your pattern piece, you will find a buttonhole marking. It is a straight line with a T at one end. That is a buttonhole marking. That shows you where the top of the buttonhole will be placed on your garment. The length of that line is not necessarily the length of your buttonhole. The first measurement that you will need to have an accurate buttonhole so that the button fits the buttonhole is to measure the diameter of the button. Use your seam gauge. And you then need one more critical measurement. You need the depth of the buttonhole. If you only have the diameter, what will happen is when you try to button the buttonhole, it will be too tight and will eventually stretch and tear the buttonhole. So it's the depth plus the diameter. I would encourage you to write on your pattern piece when you're actually making a garment that measurement so that you know exactly how large to make the buttonhole. The buttonhole and the side of the fabric that the button is sewn to will receive much abrasion, buttoning and unbuttoning. The first thing that we want to do is to stabilize our area with interfacing. On your pattern piece, it will show a depth of your facing with a solid line. You will cut a piece of interfacing that is that width and that length. For the sake of your sample, you are going to have a 3-inch piece of fabric and you are going to cut your interfacing 1 1/4 inches by 6 inches. You will need 2 pieces. The interfacing is placed against the right side of the fabric, pinned in place, taken to the sewing machine, begin stitching 1/2 inch up, having put your presser foot against the raw edge, stitching backwards, forwards, backwards. Once it is stitched, your next step is to press. Take it to the ironing board, and the first thing that you will press is to pull your interfacing out and stitch it out, press it out flat. Turn the interfacing to the wrong side of your fashion fabric and then turn it one more time to make your facing. Your finished piece will then look like this. And you will see the difference if you pick up one layer of your fabric and feel it, and the layer that has the interfacing in it. The interfacing has stabilized the fabric. That adds extra sturdiness, and it also prevents the fashion fabric from stretching as the garment is buttoned and unbuttoned. You will be doing a machine buttonhole. For this particular sample, you will want to look at page 51 and 52 of the sewing machine manual. You will see there is a special way that you need to set your thread through your buttonhole bobbin case. And you will also see that there is a specialized foot that you need. You will need foot number 3. You will then put the foot on exactly the same way that you placed it on to do the sample where you switched the foot several days ago. When you stitch the buttonhole, your instruction manual on page 52 will show you how to start, where you will stitch. You need to have a starting and stopping place. you will put a pin at the end of where the buttonhole is to finish and a pin at the beginning so that your buttonhole is exactly the right size. The machine will stitch much slower. You will want to be sure to set the stitch length selector at the setting that is required by the instruction manual. Once the buttonhole is stitched, a next critical step is cutting the buttonhole open. To cut the buttonhole open, we want to one more time put a pin at where the buttonhole ends, and where that buttonhole ends is called a bar tack. Where it begins is called a bar tack, and we are going to want to put a pin where the buttonhole begins. You will want very sharp scissors, and you will want them small if you can possibly have them. You're going to fold the buttonhole in half and have the pins meet. You are then going to snip the first layer of the fabric. Once you have a hole, you are going to pierce the fabric and you are going to very gently cut to the end of the bar tack. The pin placed at the end of the bar tack will prevent you from going through the bar tack and then deteriorating the buttonhole. Many people use a seam ripper to cut their buttonhole open. I do not recommend that. It is very easy to give one little extra thrust to the seam ripper to go across the bar tack, and then you have a buttonhole that has very little stability and will probably not stay buttoned. The last thing that you will want to do is to test your buttonhole to make sure that it is the right size. Always do a sample buttonhole before you do your actual buttonhole in order to have the fit of the button correct. It's easier to adjust it on a sample than it is to try to find buttons that will fit the buttonhole that you've made. The next step is to actually sew the button to the other side of the fabric. If this was a blouse or a dress, it would be placed on the bottom side with the buttonhole overlapping it. We place a pin through the middle of the buttonhole, and where that comes out on our fashion fabric is where the button will be sewn. When we begin to sew the button on, we are going to put a pin underneath the button, like so. And we are going to do that unless the button has what we call a man-made shank. When you look at your button, there are 3 types of buttons that you may purchase. The one is a flat button. Another type is a button with a metal shank, and that's often found on coats and jackets because the metal is heavier. Or it can have a plastic shank. The shank lifts the button off of the fabric so that it slides easily in and out of the buttonhole. If the button is flat, we need to make a thread shank, which means that the pin placed between the fashion fabric and the button allows us to do that. This button has already been started, and so I'm going to finish it for you. We secure our thread. This is one of the times that we can use a double thread. We are going to place a pin between the fashion fabric and the buttonhole, and then we are going to go back and forth in the holes of the button. This button has 4 holes, And as you look at the 4 holes, you would have the choice of either going at a diagonal, or going straight up and down, or going widthwise. But once you decide on the button direction, the way you're going to sew it on, it's a good idea to stay consistent. The button is usually sewn on with matching thread, although you can use a contrasting thread. We fill in the holes, and then the last thing that we do is to pick up the button, remove the pin, and wrap our remaining thread around the button until we have a thread shank. Once that thread shank is created, then we place our needle back through the fashion fabric to the wrong side, pull it through, tie it off, make a knot. As with all of your other knots, snip your thread close to the base of the knot, but not too close so that it comes undone. And you would do that for every button that you have. This sample, you will have a variety of steps. The first is that you will have your interfacing attachment. The second will be that you have created a button hole and cut it open. You have then marked your button hole placement, sewn the button on. If you have a flat button, you will have a thread shank. If you have a button with an existing shank, then you would sew it on just back and forth without the thread shank. So it would be the interfacing, buttonhole, and the actual attachment to the fabric of the button. Final step is to button your button so that I am confident that it works.